We are in the third week, right in the middle of a series called Get Out and Stay Out. And we're having some fun tracking the story of the ancient Hebrews in the Old Testament and the Bible. And really what the series is about is this idea that some things are just really hard to quit. It feels like sometimes there's like this invisible bungee cord connecting us to the thing we're trying to leave behind, but we just can't seem to break free. And so we started by asking, what is that bungee cord? And of course, the Bible has a word for at least part of what that is, and it's called sin. You might think it's an antiquated term, but in reality, all of us struggle with falling short and making choices that aren't healthy, and we sabotage our own success. And sin is not even just the things we do. There's a power there. I've been talking to people in the last couple of weeks about this idea that sin isn't just behavior, it's a power. It's a spiritual power that you can be in bondage to. So these ancient Hebrews, back to this story. Okay, so just to get you up to speed, if you haven't been here with us for the last couple of weeks, the Hebrews had been slaves in a nation called Egypt. You may have heard of that nation if you haven't heard of the Hebrews. They're the precursor to Israel. Those are the Hebrews. But they had been in Egypt for 400 years, actually 430 years. They had been in captivity so long that there wasn't a single Hebrew alive that knew what it was like to be free. In fact, all of them, their entire identity, their entire way of life was wrapped around being a slave. They didn't know how to govern themselves. They didn't know how to make decisions for themselves. Their culture was heavily shaped by being slaves, and their thinking in particular was bound by a slave mentality. So we were talking about this idea. One of the reasons we can't seem to break free is that if you think you're a slave, you'll think like a slave, and then you'll live like a slave, right? Because that's the way you think. If you think you can't escape what it is you're trying to leave behind, you probably won't, right? You'll probably continue along that vein. So what we talked about last week was this idea that all of our stories are the same, because there's no one in this room that's not stuck in something. There's something you want to quit. I know it. There's a habit, there's a relationship, maybe there's just a way of life, maybe it's a good habit you want to start and you can't seem to leave behind doing nothing. You just can't seem to do what it is you want to do. Everyone in this room is like that. We talked last week about the fact that our stories literally continue on the same track, and then I, and we never seem to make progress. But the real game changer is when our stories go, then I, but God. That's the moment. Now, I know that the moment I say that, there are probably some people in this room, because we're all at different spots in our spiritual journey. There are probably people in this room that go, okay, it's the God piece. I guess I should expect that. It's church. But why does it have to always be God? Because some of you may be thinking this. Look, yes, I'm stuck. I'll give you that. But why would I trade bondage to one thing for bondage in another thing? So I'm going to trade bondage to lust, or bondage to porn, or bondage to alcohol, or bondage to a certain way of thinking. I'm going to trade that for bondage to religion. Or I'm going to trade that for bondage to God. I don't understand, how does that, just being slaves here become slaves there, how does that make any difference? And I just want to point out, that's a good observation. It's a really good observation. In fact, Paul, one of the early followers of Jesus, said this. He said, it's true, you're slaves to whom, or to the one that you obey. So if that's ever crossed your mind, how does it mean that I'm free if I'm just trading my allegiance from one place to another place? You're absolutely right. The question is, does your allegiance to the things that you're bound to now actually set your heart free? And does it produce joy and peace in your life like God can do for us? And by the way, if you're wondering, but I understand, I hear this church thing all the time, and Pastor, you're paid to say this, so right? You might be wrestling with it like that. You might be saying, look, I just want to know that if I'm going to switch my allegiance from one thing to another, who is this God? Who is he that I should just throw all my chips or all my eggs in that basket, right? And what you need to know, back to these Hebrews, is there were people in this story asking the very same question. So again, if you're asking that question, okay, why should I go with God In particular, this God, the God that the pastor's talking about week after week, why this God? The Pharaoh who didn't want Egypt or to let the Israelites go, that Pharaoh asked the very same question. Look at how he put it. I just thought that was a kind of a cool picture. He said, because Moses came to him, right, the deliverer of the Israelites, right, and God sent him, anointed him with power to go, let my people, have you seen Charlton Heston do that? Let my people go. And this is Pharaoh's response. Who's the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? Yeah, I don't know the Lord. I'm not going to let Israel go. Right? He's like, that's just really, I don't even know who you're talking about. And the funny thing is, he's not the only one asking the question. Did you know that Moses found it extremely hard to mobilize the Israelites, the Hebrews, around their own cause? Like they were asking the same question. Like, so what you're telling us is that you want us to revolt, you want us to walk out the front door of Egypt. They were asking too, well, who is this, the Lord guy, that we should follow and obey him? They're asking the same question. Everybody's asking the same question. Now, Pharaoh, to be fair, had really good reasons for asking this question. You may be aware that the Egyptian religion was surrounded by a pantheon of gods. That's the name for a network of gods, right? And so there was a god of the Nile, and there was a god of the air, and a god of the sea, and a god of like all kinds of stomach gas, and a god of you need to pass your exam, and so this is the god you pray to, and this like they had a god for everything, And Pharaoh was like the human figurehead of this entire pantheon. He was like venerated as God in the flesh. Not saying to believe it. That's just how they believe, right? So the Pharaoh to go, who's the Lord that I, Pharaoh, should obey him? Do you understand? I am the visible incarnation of the entire pantheon of Egypt, and I don't think I'm just going to bow because you say, hey, let my people go. Even if you say it with a cool accent, Moses, I'm not going to do it. So what the thing is, we look at this Pharaoh guy, and we look at this religion, and we go, how could people be that out to lunch? Right? How could people believe that there's a God of the hills and a God of the trees and a God of the forest and a God and a God and a God and a God? How can people believe that kind of thing? That's a very white North American comment to make. Because most of the religions in human history, except maybe 3 monotheistic, that means one God religions, most religions in human history have believed in a plurality of gods. In other words, most people who have ever lived believed in more than one God. And even the big 3, so Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, that are monotheistic religions, are fairly late coming to the game. Right? Historically speaking, they haven't been around that long. And each one of those religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, also struggle within their ranks to worship one God. So if you would go to the Middle East and you would find a village somewhere in Iraq and you would talk to the people about what they actually believe and they didn't think they'd get their heads chopped off for saying it, they would tell you that there's all kinds of little folk things they do and they pray to this deity and that deity and this. That's true. And all the way through Israel's history, they were struggling continuously with worshiping more than one God. We're going to get to that in a minute. And even within Christianity, in Catholicism, what often happens is that we take these saints and we start praying to them, and this is what happened. In fact, if you go to Central America, where the Catholic Church kind of did the convert or die sort of methodology in certain points in history, you will find that some of these religions, like the ancient Aztecs had a pantheon, and the Mayans had a pantheon, and all these different religions had pantheons. When the Catholics came and said, convert, God is the one true God, it's through Jesus and all this stuff, but he's got all these little saints. Well, all they did is they took their gods and gave them saint names. Literally. So I remember going door to door on a mission trip once in Mexico, like in the heart of Mexico somewhere, and we were talking to someone about Jesus. He's like, oh yeah, no, I believe that Jesus is real and everything. And I said, well, do you want to give your life to Jesus? Oh no, my saint would kill me. Doesn't sound like monotheism to me. Sounds like there's something going on there. So most humans, in fact, you could say all humans struggle to believe that one God can actually handle everything. Now, just let that sit for a minute. Most human beings believe, and I would almost say all human beings, struggle to believe that one God can actually handle everything. Now, practically speaking, I think this is one of the reasons we struggle is that we sort of envision God to be like us. And that's how we live. None of us can do it all, right? I attempt minor plumbing projects, but when it comes to something any more serious, I know a guy, right? And it might not be a guy these days, but the fact that we even have that phrase, I know a guy. I could call a guy for you. I got this guy. Like, the fact is we got all these go-to guys that we're going to call, and other go-to gals that are probably better plumbers and keep their pants up, and it's a much better deal. But right? But the fact is that we know that we can't handle everything. And so we have all these people we call to get stuff done in our lives, as we should. But the problem is that sort of leaches into our spiritual life. We project that mentality on God, and we're thinking, there's no one God that could possibly handle all of this. Look at this. This is complicated. I can't even mow my lawn in summer. I don't have time to do that, so I got to get the lawn guy to come. Right? This is how we think. Now, it all depends on how we define a God. So if you mean, do I have a physical idol set up in my house, most of us would go, no. But if you define a God as what or who we pursue or depend on to meet our deepest needs, what or whom we pursue or depend on to meet our deepest needs, then I think we all struggle with polytheism. Because we all kind of look to God for some things and not others. And we're going to talk about that today. Now, back to Pharaoh and Israel, right? They're both asking this question. They're asking the question that we need to be asking this morning. So, who is the Lord that I should obey him in particular? Now, what happened in Israel's case and in this story is that God was trying to break Israel, break the Hebrews out of Egypt, right? Trying to set them free. But they were in a thoroughly polytheistic culture with this pantheon of gods, and the Egyptians believing all of this around them. Now, Israel, that's all they had known. They had grown up in a polytheistic culture, a culture that believed in many gods, and that had translated into their thinking. It's part of what was keeping them enslaved. Because they believed that all of these gods were arrayed against them, that they couldn't escape, because look at all these gods blocking the way. Okay? So this is what God told Moses, who is this deliverer that he set up to lead his people out. He said, say to the Israelites, now keep in mind, this is to people who are in this polytheistic world, tell them, I am the Lord. Now look, I know a guy, and I know a guy, and I know a guy, and I know a guy, like Zeus, who had all these little demigods that he would use to get stuff done. No, I'm the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people. I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord, your God. This is all intentional language. You ever wondered why he's so repetitive? He's dealing with slaves who are thinking in a polytheistic way. He's trying to break that in them. He's the one who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians, and I will bring you to the land I swore with an uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you as a possession. Oh, just in case you missed it, I am the Lord. You see what he's doing? He's setting very clear boundaries. He's saying, there's only one God that you need. Just me. Just me. Just look to me. Now, what happens next, these signs and wonders that God was going to use to set them free were a series of plagues. You've maybe heard the story. Maybe you saw that DreamWorks film that came out, that animated film years ago, Prince of Egypt, right? That kind of showed how God used these plagues to set them free. Sometimes it can look like God's like, whoa, God's like not having a good day. All of these, plagues are being unleashed on these Egyptians. But what's happening is God is challenging their gods. And God is challenging the gods for the sake of the Egyptians and for his people. So here's what happens. I gotta show you this. The first thing is that Moses gets his staff and he's leaning on it, and God says, hey, give me your staff. He's like, what? Yeah, throw it down. Okay, throws it down, becomes a snake. Oh, he's scared of why does it have to be snakes? So God says, pick up the snake. So pick up the snake. So he picks it up from the end and it turns back into a stick. He's like, oh, that's the coolest thing. Now take this to the Egyptians, and I want to show you, they're gonna listen to you now. Oh yeah, they're gonna listen to me now. He's walking like careful, is it gonna turn back into a snake, right? So he gets in front of the Egyptians, and what does he do? He says, let my people go, in that great voice that he's been rehearsing. And then they're like, no. So he's like, okay, back up. And this thing turns into a snake, and they're like, so? It's like, no, but it's a snake. And they're like, okay. So they take their rods, they throw them down, they turn to snakes. Moses is like, what? How did that even work? But then what happens is Moses' snake eats their snakes. See, they had power, just not that much power. Now, here's the thing. There was a god of magic in Egypt named Thoth, or something like that. What God was doing in that setting was he's showing you, oh, by the way, I have power over Thoth. I have dominance over Thoth. Then these plagues start to roll out, right? So the Nile turns to blood. There's a god, Hapi, H-A-P-I, who's the god of the Nile, or Nun, who's the god of the primal waters. And God basically says, yeah, it's like the bloodstream of the gods. He goes, yeah, I have dominance over that too. And then the frogs, the plague of frogs, the god Heket, this one's a little funny, had the head of a frog. She's like, oh really, you control the frogs? Pull this back. See, the role of Pharaoh was to sort of be the stand-in for the gods to keep all of these bad things from happening. And so whenever something bad happened, it made the kind of question, well, who is Pharaoh? Never mind, who's God? Who's Pharaoh? What's going on? So God's going, yeah, I'm in charge of that too. God, and then there's a plague of gnats, which directly challenges the god Heb, who's the god of the ground and the dust. God took the dust of the ground and turned a whole bunch of the dust into gnats and lice, or however the translation goes. And so literally, Heb is out of control. He doesn't know what he's doing because God's in charge of that. And then there's a plague of flies all over the land. Well, Khepri is a god that had a bug's head. So you want bugs? I got bugs. Boom, right? Just kind of lays that one flat. And then there's a plague of livestock, and Hathor is the god of protection and love. And by the way, she had a cow's head. So we're just rubbing that in a little bit. He's got power over the livestock. And then there's a plague of boils, and nobody can stop it, which is too bad because Isis is supposed to be the god of medicine, and she apparently can't do anything about the boils. And then there's a plague of hail from the sky, and Nut is the god of the sky, and apparently he's not in control of the sky. Some other god is, which is the god of the Hebrews. And then there's a plague of locusts, which directly challenges Serapia, who's supposed to protect them from locusts, and apparently has no power. It's her one job. It's your one job. And then there's darkness that comes over the entire land, which apparently means the sun god Ra has no power. And then, as a finale, when everybody's going, what is wrong with our pantheon? God strikes the firstborn of all the Egyptians, including Pharaoh, who is powerless to stop it. The visible incarnation of the gods. And it's at this point that all of Egypt begs Pharaoh, get rid of these people. We can't handle these people. He's like, oh yeah, go. Please go. And they push them, literally push them out the front door because they can't handle the power of this Hebrew God. That's what's going on. He goes through this elaborate process to show them that their pantheon is made of straw. That they don't actually need all these gods. They need the one true God. And Israel goes from, well, who's the Lord that we should obey him, to my God bigger than your God. It's just like this great transfer, right? They're like, well, don't rub it in, guys. This is pretty painful. But still, they go from this, whoa. This is why God said, I will lead you. I will do it. I will judge the Egyptians. I. You just need me. Now, we've been talking about this picture of the Hebrews as a metaphor. What happened to them can happen to us. So we start our lives in bondage to things, and many of us still are in bondage to things, and it's a then I, and we need a but God in the story, which is what they experienced through those plagues. It's how they were set free. God supernaturally intervened. If that's true, if that's a picture of what Jesus did in the New Testament for us, then what we ought to see is Jesus unleashing a series of backwards plagues or whatever on Satan, right? So what did Jesus do when he arrived on earth? Well, he walked around and there's a storm. What does he do? Still. And he walks on the water. And somebody dies and he raises them from the dead. And there's someone with leprosy and he heals the lepers and the demon. Out. Boom. He's got power over everything. You only need one God. And then what does he do? Satan thinks he's got him. He's like, I got this. We're going to crucify him. And he crucifies Jesus, who was always in the plan. He dies with our sin on his shoulders without Satan knowing what he was doing. If he had known, he never would have done it. That's what the scriptures say. And then he dies, right? And Satan's think, I won. So the storm didn't work, and the demons didn't work, and the leprosy didn't work, but death has conquered. And Jesus rises from the dead and goes, Your greatest weapon just got neutralized. So this is what, after these plagues of the Egyptians, that is nothing. Making a public spectacle of this pantheon of gods, this is what Paul says in Colossians 2:15. He says, having disarmed the powers and the authorities, the spiritual powers, Jesus, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. Do you see the parallel, the analogy? This is our Moses, the better Moses, who leads us out of Egypt, the Egypt of our sin. It's far more damning and powerful than the Egypt the Hebrews had to live with. And he sets us free, and he sets us on a path of increasing freedom. That is an amen moment. I'm just saying. I'm thinking, yeah. Now, I don't know if it's ever occurred to you, but if you're a believer in Jesus, if you're really a believer in Jesus, your salvation story is a power encounter story. You were set free from death and hell and Satan and sin in a power encounter that Jesus won, and Satan had to relive one more time this disarming and this public spectacle as you were set free from his greatest weapons. It's a power encounter. We don't often see it that way, but it is. I remember in another city that I was living in another church that I was working in, it's a kind of an interesting story, so I'll leave it as vague as that. There was a guy in our life group that was a bodybuilder. I mean, he was huge. Like, rock hard, massive dude. He wasn't as tall as me, but probably doubled my weight. You know, one of these guys, I'd say to my kids, he had muscles in places I don't have places. He was so big. And he texted me or called me, after life group, and he said, Brad, I got to talk to you. I was like, what's going on? He was not a believer in Jesus. And I said, what's going on? He says, I got demons, man. I got demons in me. They're telling me stuff, and I got all this crazy stuff going on in my head. I got to talk to you. I'm like, sure, let's meet. Let's meet at the church. It was the middle of winter, so it was like minus 25. I just ran out of the house. I didn't even get a jacket because we're going to run right into the church. And I met him at the church, and he's like all shifty-eyed and stuff. And remember, this huge dude. He's wearing winter jackets. He's even bigger, and I'm just in this little sweater. Just like, welcome here. So we're standing at the door to the church, and he goes, oh, I can't go in. Can I have a smoke first? Like, sure. So I got my hands in my pockets, and I'm like, whoa, so cold, so cold. He's taking his good old time, just trying not to smoke in my face because I'm like right close to him, right? And we're talking. I'm going, you can do this. We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And then he starts glaring at me. And he's like, the voices are telling me stuff. I'm like, really? What are they saying? They're saying I should beat the out of you right now. I'm standing with my hands in my pockets 2 feet in front of him. So I took a step forward because I know that the one in me is greater than the one in him. I'm like, we're good. We're fine. Just smoke up, finish up. I'm going to go inside. So he finishes his cigarette, and he's the kind of guy that could probably throw me into the 7th row if he wanted to. He's probably done that to people before. And so we sit down in this darkened sanctuary, and I start saying, like, what you need, dude, is you need to give your life to Jesus because he's the one who can set you free. And can you do that? And he's like, no, I can't do it. I can just feel it. He's like his whole body is like rippling, right? He's just like in this conflict. And I was like, okay, so I'm going to pray. Do I have permission from you to pray to deal with this thing that is afflicting you? He says, yeah, you have to. So I'm like, okay, so in the name of Jesus, who has disarmed all these powers and authorities, I just command whatever spirit is in or around this dude, I command you to let go right now. You cannot interfere. You cannot talk. You cannot do anything. And while I'm praying, they're just kind of, he's saying, they're like swearing at you. They're swearing at you. I'm like, so I got to the end. I went, in the name of Jesus, go. And he goes, like this. As he goes, there's a storage room behind us, and stuff starts falling off the walls in the storage room. And he's like, what? I'm like, forget that. They're gone. Now, can you give your life to Jesus? Uh-huh. And I led him in a prayer to put his faith in Jesus Christ. There's a power encounter that you can see. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not real. If you're a believer in Jesus, you've been rescued from a kingdom, a real kingdom with real power that still wants to exert dominance over you. So why should I believe in the Lord and follow him? Because this other kingdom wants to lead you into darkness. God wants to give you life. That's the character of his kingdom. So Israel walks out of Egypt because Pharaoh wants nothing to do with them. But you know the story. We've been talking about it, been going over it every week in some way. So what happens? Pharaoh changes his mind, right? Because these are the slaves that did all the slave labor. So he musters an army together, right? And he marches them out, and there's this big battle over the Red Sea, right? Remember, God splits the sea open again that deals with one of those gods and swallows up the army. So I guess the god of war is toast. So God is dealing with every single god. And then when they're finally clear on the other side of the sea, Moses gets a call, gets a summons from God. And God calls him up onto a mountain called Sinai, where he's going to receive the 10 commandments. They're going to govern this new group. We're going to talk about that next week because they're not used to governing each other. They don't know how to govern each other. They don't know how to handle all their relationships and all that stuff. So God's got to give them these guidelines, right? So we're going to get into that in a minute. But while Moses is up on the mountain, the Israelites are going, wow, it's been a long time. He's been gone because it's a couple of days up there, right? And they're like, maybe he died. Maybe he fell into a hole, or I don't know, something zapped him up there. He got stung by a scorpion. And they're getting restless. They're going, we should do something. Don't you think? Like, we're kind of exposed here. And we don't know what it is we're supposed to be doing. And then Aaron, who's like functioning as the priest, he's like, you know what? Give me all your silver and gold that the Egyptians lavished on you when they left, when they said, please, good riddance. If we pay you, promise you won't come back. That stuff, you take that, and he melts it down in a furnace. And what does he make? A golden calf. Have you ever wondered why a golden calf? Hathor is the god of love and protection. While Moses is up on the mountain, there's this roiling smoke and this cloud, and there's thunder and lightning. The Israelites are like, he's so scary. And so they're like, how about let's build a loving God, a loving protection God, and make it a cow so that maybe he'll feed us. Like, literally, this is what they're doing. How are we going to get fed in this desert? So they're not even like a few days out of Egypt, and they're already starting to reproduce the pantheon because they're finding it hard to believe that one God could actually handle their lives. While they're up there, the irony of this is crazy. While they're down there smelting the cow, Moses is up on the mountain, and God's saying to him this. This is the beginning of the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Before me means in my face. He's basically saying, get all these gods out of my face. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything, in heaven or above or on the earth or beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. So while God's engraving the Ten Commandments, you shall not do this, Israelites are doing it already. So you know why God had to write it down, because we're so prone to creating other gods other than the one true God. And again, we do this whether you believe in God proper or not. Because again, a God is what? Whom or what we pursue and depend on to meet our deepest needs. All of us have a pantheon that we go to meet various needs. Now here's the issue. The Israelites are not saying, by making this golden calf, God, we don't want you anymore. They're saying, you seem busy. How about we make you some help? How about you delegate it out? You can still be like the equivalent of Zeus, right? You can be in charge, but we'll just have this like fertility and love and this God over here too. We're thinking because of the way we've been raised, they're trying to switch gods. They're not. They're trying to add. That's the culture they grew up in. And actually, we're far more like them than we think we are. Again, we go to God for some things and not others. And so, when we look to Jesus for our salvation, we have to be very careful that that's not all we're looking to him for. So we go, oh yeah, we might even be able to say, he's God in the flesh, and he died because he's the God of gods. That's what he's proving by disarming death and hell and Satan and all of that. Just like God was the God of gods coming out of Egypt, Jesus is asserting his dominance as the God of gods, right? That's what he's doing by dying on the cross and rising from the grave. But we look at him as one option among many. So we look to Jesus for salvation, but we still got our pantheon. We still look to, and these may not be assigned properly. Maybe you see this differently, but maybe we're looking to money for our security. We've got enough money in the bank. That's where security comes from. Maybe you look to horoscopes for guidance. Maybe you have to succeed in order to feel validated, or maybe you think we need children, so if your parents or whatever, that gives me my sense of purpose. What are we doing when we're doing that? We're farming out our basic or our deepest needs to things that aren't God, which means that we're using the spiritual things in life to serve us. That's their job. So somebody's job is to make me happy. Someone else's job is to make me feel secure. Somebody else's job is to make me feel significant. Right? This is kind of what we do. Jesus, and you've probably heard this, church people say this all the time. Jesus is an important part of my life. That's this. This is what Todd White would call Jesus Incorporated. I'll incorporate Jesus into my life, but he isn't my life. He's not the God of gods. He's just a God that provides a service that's truly important. He paid for my sins. He did all that. But he's not God, the God of gods. He's not the one-stop shop. He's not the one that can handle everything. When the Bible is telling us, and the writers of the New Testament, and Jesus himself is saying, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Even that statement to a polytheistic culture means I'm it. I'm the only one you need. Just me. Find all of these things in me, and then you'll be free to actually enjoy these other things without being enslaved to them, because you're slaves to whom you obey. Now, I don't know where you're at this morning, but I do know if you're anything like me, if you're human, your world looks probably a little more like this. If you're claiming to be a believer in Jesus, there are things you go to Jesus for, absolutely. Otherwise, some of you, why would you be coming to church regularly? But you still kind of look to other things and other people to provide these basic needs that only He can satisfy. And you end up getting disappointed over and over and over again when these gods fail you. Now, here's a question. Is it cruel for God to show us that our pantheon isn't powerful enough to save us? Is it cruel if you're putting your sense of security into your line of credit for that to tank? Or I'm not saying God causes it, maybe He does, but even if He did, would that be cruel? If He knows that God is going to disappoint you over and over and over again. Wouldn't it be the kindest thing in the world to show you that all of these other gods can't do it for you and that your ultimate trust needs to be in Him and only Him? What happens, and this is again showing our polytheistic view of the world, when we're supposed to be trusting God, but we look to other things to satisfy us, and they fail us, who do we blame? Him. You're supposed to be working through these demigods. Is He? Or does He want to be it? Now, I want to challenge you this morning. If you're a believer in Jesus, I want you to ask Him, where do I have other gods in my life? Where am I still looking to other things and people to satisfy me where only You can satisfy me? And I dare you to do what it takes, and if you need help, I can help you, and other people can help you, I'm sure that are here, to dethrone that. To say, no, I'm not going to worship that. I'm not going to pursue that. I'm not going to depend on that anymore. I'm going to put my faith in Jesus and only Jesus, and I'm going to learn how to sever this tie, okay? I challenge you, why would you, if you claim to be a believer in Jesus, not clean house? If you're a believer in Jesus, that's what you need to do. Now, if you are not a believer in Jesus, what I want for you is what God wants for you. I want for you to see that Jesus is not just the way, not just the truth, not just the life. He's not just Savior, not just Lord, not just healer, not just provider, not just Father, not just guide, not just our significance and our life and our love. He's everything that we need. And the fact that Christians have it mixed up doesn't mean that He isn't who He says He is. And I'm sorry if you're not a believer in Jesus for being a bad example of what a Christian should be. But I'm so glad that Jesus is so enough that even when I blow it, He's still good. So this is not a guilt trip, folks. This is a wake up, because part of you might still be in Egypt. And you're thinking you're a slave, and you're thinking like a slave, and you're living like a slave. And it's time to walk out the front door and follow King Jesus. That's it. That's it. So I'm going to pray in a second. And also, I'm going to challenge you to follow Jesus if you haven't before. We're back to the baptism thing. Baptism is a symbol of, and we got a hot tub back there. It's awesome. We actually dunk here. Baptism, here's what it means. Baptism is a symbol of what Jesus has done in your heart. It's a symbol that you have died. But when you give your life to Jesus, what you're saying is that old Egypt life is dead. I give it to you, it's dead. And thank you for raising me to new life in Christ. And it's declaring to us, to yourself, to God, to any of these other powers that might be listening, that you're His now and that you're walking out the front door. That's what it symbolizes.